I'm Sarah Chapman, and I'm the executive director of the nonprofit Media Burn Archive, which is based in Chicago. Media Burn collects, produces, and distributes documentary video created by artists, activists, and community groups. And our mission is to use archival media to deepen context and encourage critical thought through a social justice lens. This event is part of an ongoing series called Virtual Talks with Video Activists, which creates conversations surrounding independent media production. Tonight, we are so excited to be presenting a discussion with electronic art pioneer Dan Sandin, as well as film scholar Jason Nebergall. So I'm going to hand it over to Jason, but I just wanted to again reiterate those housekeeping things and orient you to the flow of the event. So yes, please stay muted during the introductions and during the screening, but we would love for when it's time for discussion for you to either put questions in the chat or you can raise your hand. There's a little feature on the bottom of your screen somewhere that says raise hand. You can raise your hand and Jason will invite you to come on screen and ask your question live. Either way is fine. We want this to be very interactive and conversational. I also just wanted to point out that if you haven't noticed it, we do have closed captions enabled on this event. And so if you go to the bottom of your screen, there's a CC button that says live transcript, and you can either turn that on or off. If you like it, if it helps you, turn it on. And if it annoys you, then you can turn it off. Let me check my notes. I think that's all I wanted to tell you. Yes, so Jason Nebergall is a PhD candidate in screen cultures at Northwestern University. His interests include avant-garde television, video art, the late 1960s and early 1970s, and modes of resistance to rationality. He has a master's degree from the University of Chicago. And thank you for joining us, Jason.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. Thank you for all the work that you've done to make this possible. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for coming. I'm Jason Nebergall. I'm a PhD candidate at Northwestern, as Sarah said, and what we're here to see is the work of Dan Sandin. Dan Sandin is an internationally recognized pioneer of electronic art and visualization. In 1969, Sandin developed a computer-controlled light and sound environment called GlowFlow at the Smithsonian Institution and was therefore invited to join the art faculty at the University of Illinois in Chicago the same year. By 1973, he had developed the Sandeen image processor, a highly programmable analog computer for processing video images in real time. He then worked with Tom DeFanti to combine the image processor with real-time computer graphics and performed visual concerts, the electronic visualization events, which you'll be seeing clips of tonight, with synthesized musical accompaniment. In 1991, Sandin and DeFanti conceived and developed in collaboration with graduate students the CAVE virtual reality theater. In recent years, Sandin has been concentrating on the development of auto stereo virtual reality displays, i.e. free viewing without glasses in a virtual reality environment, and on the creation of network-based telecollaborative virtual reality artworks that involve video camera image materials, rich human interaction, and mathematical systems. With no further ado, Dan Sandin.
Hi, thanks. I appreciate all the work for the showrunner and for moderator inviting me to be part of this. The only thing I want to set up is for the people that are much younger than me. At the time of the early 70s, and the late 60s, which the first videos you'll see, there were really only 3 TV networks that had control of essentially all the creation and distribution of video imagery on the planet, with also PBS added, but only in the largest markets. And because of the difficulty of producing, the equipment and the difficulty of producing video television, they really did control discourse completely. But then the creation or the becoming availability of low-cost video production equipment, the Sony Portapak and then the associated editors, which you could put together for the price of a good used car. It suddenly made possible for small institutions in particular, but also individuals, to have the tools to be able to create and display video. And at that time, it was very clear that this was a revolution and was going to change the world. And we thought for the better. And it did. The only thing for people that are have experienced it, at least in the last 20 years, it was feeling very similar to the invention of the internet and the way that changed the way we learn things and the way we communicate with people and everything else. But it was very much the same kind of transformational feeling among the video workers of the time. So that's what I'd say as an introduction.
Okay, should I play the first video?
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to start on. And the first video will be a 5-minute romp through the image processor, as well as a video called Colorful Colorado that was made in 1976 by Phil Morton and Stuart Pettigrew.
Well, I should just start over again. Go back to the naturalistic image. Boop. Boop. Here we go. People at Electronic Arts Intermix thought I should talk into a camera, say a couple of things about my work, and show some environments I work in. So this is the environment I work mostly in. Here's the image processor. The image processor is an analog computer, an analog video synthesizer, and by turning dials on it and sliding sliders up and down and rerouting cables, I can make it do a large variety of video activities. And here's the tape recorder, which this tape is being made. And this is the microphone cable and piles of tape. And a cold winter in Chicago out the window there. Back around. Now, the simplest way to show what the image processor does is to simply do some simple or primitive processing steps that it can do. For instance, the comparator, which is this unit here, I'm now running a signal from the camera input into the comparator and then into this output module. And if I switch to the process signal, you see something like a codolith turned all black and white, except that I can very easily adjust the gray level at which that transition is made. Now that's one primitive processing step. Another primitive processing step is the function generator, which I will transfer to now. And with that, you see I can adjust the continuous transfer gray levels. There's the white area, middle gray area, and black area, and produce effects that are like solarization, but somewhat more complicated. Another processing step that I can use is the differentiator, which is this module over here, which just extracts edge information. For instance, the white hand, which is a different color than the background, or different value than the background, appear at the same value, because all non-changing, all constant values have been thrown out, and I look at edges. Another one is the Value Scrambler, which is this module here. I'm patching in here and out here, and I'll turn to that process. What that does is divide the value region up into 8 separate value regions, and I have independent control out of each one of those value regions. I'm going down now and adjusting them from white to black, or playing with them from white to black. This module, like other modules, the knobs also can be done by control voltage, which allows for a more complex interaction.
Phil Morton, assistant professor at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, performed this piece, which he entitles Colorful Colorado.
Not many people do want to talk to a dumbbell.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we don't understand. We really wonder about anybody to talk to a dumbbell, for sure. Hey, so that's the reason we took the cross-eye, because we know for sure we were the dumbbell. But mercy, we wanted to do some talking, so we thought cross-eye would be a lot better about it.
Yeah, deal for it. Okay, well, we're going to be gone getting in here to Denver in a little bit. How about your cross-eye? How about your cross-eye?
Hey, you got one.
get the boulder, or are you just fooling around?
I negatory. We not fooling around. We going there for sure. We're gonna just stay on the 3-6 according to the map. We ain't gonna have any trouble, I don't think. Why, is there a better way to go?
No, negatory. I just, said they need somebody to lead you around, so I thought if you really needed leading, I'd lead you.
Hey, oh, for sure we need leading. No doubt about that. Yeah, for sure we need help. But Mercy, yeah, we just looked down at the map and we go Boulder okay on the 3-6. Oh, we just had a problem back there with that wrecker truck. You see, he blocked our vision. We couldn't see anything away.
Mexico Station to go. Yeah, Jim 4, if you take this 270 up here north, it'll save you a little bit of trouble. You won't have to run through downtown Denver.
Okay, 270 for sure.
Yeah, Jim 4, yeah, 270 to 25 north to 36. And that way, you don't have to fool with downtown.
Yeah, for sure. We don't want to go down there. No way. Yeah, we just hope they keep putting those little 3-6s on the signs. We say on the 270, right?
Yeah, Jim 4.
That was began with the romp through the IP, Colorful Colorado, and then Speak to Me Softly by Annette Barbier and Richard Mandenberg, and Photo Booth at Center Focus by Drew Brownie, and edited by Greg Daw. So, so Dan, those were created for a live performance event. You're still muted. I'm sorry.
Thank you for letting me know. A very good gesture. But the well, that last section you saw was an installation. In other words, people came into this gallery installation and sat in front of various different stations and then interacted with the IP and other equipment, and then saw what they produced in real time. By turning dials, sliding sliders, and making sounds. And the output from that was edited together into essentially a documentation of that environment. But the big point it makes is at this time, a tremendous amount of the video was real-time performance. There of course was post-production and editing the document, but in terms of the visuals you were seeing, there was no editing. That was just, it was like playing music. And in the case of, let's say, A Color for Colorado, what was going on, there obviously was a videotape input from his travels in Colorado, shot out of his very famous van. And that was a base for the tape. But what you saw was him layering in real time the feedback and all of that, essentially doing a performance in front of the tape recorder to produce those kinds of results. And even where you clearly saw things inserted in like the computer graphics and stuff like that, that was actually a layer where it would be playing back and you'd push record on the tape recorder and it would do a insert edit. And then when you push stop, it would stop, but it was writing over what was already there. So there were these continuous layers of performance that were used to produce that tape. So it was a very different kind of production path than we now think of. And it was very much more like playing music than video production as we know it.
One thing I keep thinking about is how ultimately the raw footage is the final cut, that as these images are being created, they are being edited on the fly for an assembled group of attendees at one of the electronic visualization events.
Right, and even before we did the digital event stuff that you'll be seeing a little bit later, we would move the image processor around. It was a fairly portable gadget, and set it up and perform before audiences. And then we'd also play videotapes. We do both of these things. So there was a lot of, very much like music of the time in terms of its distribution system. A lot of these weren't usually small clubs, although we did do some stuff in bars and things like that, but they would be, groups of 20 or 30 people that we would, at an auditorium at a school or something like that. Mm-hmm. And that's what was our primary kind of production and display environment.
And thinking about this as music, it's a lot more like improvisational jazz than, pre-written classical piece or something. That it's working with the images as they come on the fly live in front of an audience, and it'll never be the same way again. Yeah,
that's very much. In fact, there were three. Well, later on we'll see the Eve performances, and specifically Spiral, and there were 5 performances of Spiral, and we'll see some from Spiral 1 and some from Spiral 5. But it was very much that thing. There were things that held that together, but they were different every time and had more material added. Another aspect was many of you may have become uncomfortable with the length of the video feedback sequences that were going on in Phil Morton's piece. And it depends a little bit on your display environment. If you had a big screen and it filled your environment, you probably it would not feel as long. But in my work, for instance, I tried to keep things as short as possible, but they had to be long enough so people had time to kind of drop into it. So it's more like, watching water waves or something like that. It's a more meditative kind of interaction that was trying to be produced there in those sections, and that takes time. When I see it now, it's just like, I just love it. It's just, it drops me back into that time and that space and that speed of things.
I find it hypnotic to watch this stuff where, as opposed to watching it to see what happens next, you're watching it to watch what it is at the moment. It brings me into this very sort of meditative state that I find remarkable and unique. So much video art I see is oftentimes very aggressive and quick and loud and bright, whereas this lets me drift along with it. And I imagine that effect would be considerably heightened with a group of people in an auditorium.
Yeah, and then also, in these installations, like was in the second section there, people would do that. People would set up that kind of environment, and they'd set up oscillators, so they'd be switching between images of themselves. That really pulled them in, because of the famous artist Nanju Paik said that, video feedback is like sex. It's much more fun for the person doing it than the person watching. And so that's also the thing we felt, which was that the kind of way we felt producing this work and performing this work was what was really important. And the stuff that got onto the videotape was just kind of the exhaust of that process. And so we kept trying to bring back through these installations the ability of other people to sit down and have the same kind of transformative experience of controlling images and having a certain amount of automation, which synthesizers give you, so that you can do higher level control, and then some of the structure just evolves from the way you plug things together.
So, continuing from my jazz metaphor, it's almost like a jam session where you'd bring people in, you'd have instruments available to them, and they'd get together and make the work as a community. It's a community building.
Yeah, these things, there were about 20 copies of the image processor built. There may be more. There's 20 that I kind of know about, 22 that I know about. And in the city, there were several, at least 5 or 6 at any given time. And so we used to bring them together, because then you had a very large IP and you could do things you could never do on just a 24 module IP. And we did performances where we would, and the same thing, working with musicians, taking feeds from the audio synthesizers to partially control images, because there was kind of processing units to get audio in to control video. So that was, it was an amazing time.
Absolutely. And what fascinates me about is how it's an analog setup that I believe in the next video, we'll see a little bit more about the image processor as a piece of machinery. But to my eyes, it looks like an old-timey telephone operator station. And to have such an immense gadget, and then, as you're describing, like daisy chain together different units of it, that seems astonishing.
Yeah, right. It's called data flow programming. It's a different way, and there are data flow programming metaphors in digital computing too. MSP Max, for instance, is a good example of where you connect modules together with lines in the digital domain. It's actually a programming technique. It's a data flow programming technique rather than a command line programming technique, but it has many of the same characteristics of computer programming, and is a real programming language, but it's a visual language.
Is that is ZGrass, I believe, is the programming language?
ZGrass was a command line programming language that Tom DeFani developed specifically for artists. And in the next videotapes, we'll see some of the products of the combination of using ZGrass and later Grass that ran on personal computers. And that had quite a large community. So there was a reasonably large community that was developed around the analog IP. It was a open source hardware project. Phil Morton and I spent a year of Friday afternoons as he was building his IP copy, documenting how you would build one of these things. and instructions about how to order the test equipment. And you would build Heath kits first because they had all the instructions and stuff, and that was your test equipment. And then you could build the IP. And it may seem strange at first blush that artists, video artists and artists that were in other disciplines but wanted to do video would become electronic builders. But of course, electronic building is a craft, and artists learn crafts. That's one of the things you do in art school. You learn ceramics, you learn welding, you learn woodworking or whatever. You learn these crafts. So as a matter of fact, artists were actually very well prepared to learn to build electronics because it's a construction craft. And it was very successful. People could really do it.
Absolutely. And I'm fascinated by the open source nature. Like, how were the plans distributed in the pre-internet world of the 70s?
Oh, by the USPS. There was about an 80-page document. I have a documentation of the image processor here.
Oh, wow.
And it included orders, literally what you would order from Newark, pages of it, and schematic diagrams and a place to order the printed circuit boards from, and really a complete facilitation of being able to copy these instruments. Mm-hmm. And that was actually, what was important about that is it was a way to build communities. If there was only one IP and it was only me and Phil maybe, and a few students producing on it, it would have been a very much smaller event than having 20 IPs built and people in various areas, using it as an instrument of expression, and it developed a larger audience for these things. Mm-hmm. And without that community building effort, or without that community building success, it would have really been a much smaller kind of blip, and I would have learned less, and there would have been less video produced.
Mm-hmm. And I've got a comment here from Stephen Jacobs, who is a professor of open source, and he was talking about how the IP, and Stephen, please feel free to jump in here, was an early open source hardware system, and that the ideology behind that sharing of the plans has had ramifications beyond the work itself, but simply the ideas behind distributing it and making it.
Yeah, and this link worked 2 days ago to bring up the distribution religion and the license, but it's not working now for some reason. So I was just showing it in class the other day.
What is distribution religion?
That was a document that I produced that was sent out with the IP documentation. And another way to have done this would have been to try to open a company and build these things for people. And that would have been a perfectly good way to do, like Steve Rutt and Bill Etra did that with their scan processor, and was successful and actually created a similar number of instruments. I claim I won by a few. We were keeping count. But the reason that company wasn't an economic success was that they made an attempt to make the stuff as low cost as possible so artists could afford it. I didn't want to start a small company. I considered that to be, would really divert me from being able to do my art and other stuff. So I wanted to offload that to the community. But it was a distribution technique. And other people would choose different distribution techniques in different times. I was a professor. I was paid by the state to create and disseminate information. So I did. And it was a time when universities had that kind of ivory tower approach to it, is that, of course, now universities want to monetize everything. But that wasn't the spirit of the time, even in the universities, because it really felt that it was a cultural institution that was supposed to improve the world, and it would do that by kind of creating and disseminating information at as low cost as possible.
Yeah, and so the first 2 pages are, when you teach an open source course, the first 2 pages are the hardware and software license, or the hardware license anyway. The conditions under which you can distribute, copy, and make it, this one's been edited in marker by Dan, so he says he's decided he wants a copy of every tape that the image processor makes.
No, actually not every tape. I wanted one good tape from each image processor. Was what
That's what I meant, is one good
Yeah,
tape from each
that was
instance.
my final thing. That's what I wanted back from the process.
How many
And I
did you?
did, and I did get tapes back, and that went on for a long time.
That's really cool.
And the work of this is, some of this is digital today. Dave Jones is making digital boxes of your stuff, Dan, now, or something along those lines.
Well, there was LZX. Is that what you're thinking of? The company that makes a modern analog synthesizer, which I recommend anybody considering it. When I get requests that people want to build an IP, which I actually still get, I cannot believe it, I try to direct them to a more modern analog synthesizer, and LZX was there.
I
There
thought
were a lot
David
of
Jones
people
was
building
making some boxes.
synthesizers at the time.
Yeah.
There's a Red Etcher synthesizer and Steve Beck direct video synthesizer. So there were a number of people producing this and trying to distribute them in various ways. What I think nice about the modern open source movement is that there's these licensing systems now that that are pretty clear, and that so you can actually do it and protect yourself, you know, and it's really contributed to I think the way artists can work, because they can, you know, they can say, they can produce something and say, okay, you're welcome to show all of this stuff, but you can't incorporate it into other products and show it, or you have to be not profit to do it. I mean, it's really a wonderful set of licensing that you can just have access to refine how much you want to give away and how much you want to hold. And that makes building community really a much more understandable thing to do. Everybody understands, you know, what's involved in it then, because of these kind of licensing inventions.
We have a question from Adrian Corsten.
Hi, yeah. So, Dan, this harks back to, I guess, some more non-technical issues around what you did. The video, it's a two-part question, I think, sort of two sides of a coin. The video resolution that you talked about at the very beginning of this session, do you think it achieved the outcomes that you hoped for? And specifically, do you think mainstream entities still have a disproportionate control over the messages that are received and consumed by the masses? And on the other side, do you feel that a micro broadcasting revolution, which is kind of how I categorize what you did, or what you were part of, that might dilute the effectiveness of a broader, such as countrywide community and social shared value systems, and could inadvertently lead to exclusion of outer group members and racial intolerance? And I realize that's a massive question, so I'm happy if you want me to split it up and do it.
No, it's I'll just take the part of it I want to talk about. But yeah, I mean, at the time, I was, you know, at the time of this event of doing these videotapes and stuff, definitely the feeling was wanting to expand the variety of channels. And because it was so concentrated, that there was frankly no worry about it becoming so fragmented that, you know, it wouldn't be part of the culture, because there wouldn't be, it would kind of interfere with the shared culture. And I think I still feel the same way. I still feel that, you know, having all of these channels, I mean, I find, you know, like everybody else, the internet and YouTube and all of that to be, you know, one of the most magnificent educational environments I could ever have conceived of. And so there is a loss that has to do with that we all didn't share the same, perhaps, lie that we used to do, because broadcast TV, although it had, you know, trappings of objective and all of that, as a matter of fact, is kind of, you know, somewhat similar to the kind of polarization we go now. There was a whole bunch of taboo topics that control that you just, you know, couldn't talk about on TV, which were important. And like now, you know, now I feel, of course, the government's captured by large corporations largely, and doesn't respond to the the democratic individual, in the kind of small d democratic individual. And that was kind of going on even before it became so fragmented. So I still think, as in total, it's a huge plus to have all this micro channel communication.
Thank you. Great answer.
Well, on that, Sarah, if it's all right, we can do the next batch of videos. We're going to start with a look at behind the scenes of the IP and then show some documents of performances. So as soon as we've got that, we are ready to go.
The next work you're going to see is Spiral 5, and it was actually a combination of two systems, the analog image processor here and a computer graphics system developed by Tom DeFani. So let's jump to some tape about that system. Hiya, Tom.
A little cook's tour of this laboratory in the chemistry department. We'll take you over the computer here. This single bay houses the graphics computer, and this down here, of course, is the PDP-1145 computer. Behind this panel is 28,000 words of memory. This here is the disk drive, the mass storage medium we use to hold pictures and macros and other information used to run the graphics system. Up here is the A to D converters, which allow us to use dials and knobs and sliders and other things to control images. From the computer's memory go wires that go over to the vector general. And as you can see, the vector general is capable of putting up images in real time, rotating them around. What we do there is point TV cameras at them. Little TV cameras like this, which you can move around and center and get different parts of the screen. And then, because color is much more fun than black and white, we run cables over this way to a very colorful person, Dan Sandin, inventor of the image processor.
Spiral 5 was created by Tom DeFanti, myself, Dan Sandin, and Mimi Chevetz doing sound.
It's kind of nice.
Yeah, that one's nice.
Yeah, but what happened to it? It's just really slow.
Between 1975 and 1980, there were a series of live video computer performance events at the University of Illinois at Chicago. The first was the Interactive Electronic Visualization event in 1975, followed by EVE 2 in 76 and EVE 3 in 78. During this period, there were a total of 5 performances of Spiral, the last of which is Spiral 5, called Spiral PTL for perhaps the last. What follows is a document of the performance of Spiral 1 at the first EVE event. It was performed in April 1975 and is introduced by Phil Morton.
The name of this entity is Spiral. Digital keyboard by Tom DeFanti. Analog Twiddler, Dan Sandin. And sound keyboard, Bob Snyder. Start her up. I'm starting.
doesn't. No, the clearly doesn't. Clearly doesn't. The heck clearly doesn't.
Goodbye, Phil.
Well, the real thing would involve being there in a room with other people, which obviously isn't going to happen right now. But I mean, the work itself is sort of the event, right?
So there were 3 of these electronic visualization events. The first 2 were performed in front of audiences. And the third one, most of the works were produced in front of small studio audiences, and then a tape was made. And that was shown in a big theater with a very early large video projector. Part of the evolution there was that we felt that trying to, manage, it isn't like we did these events in a theater where the theater staff managed all the crowds and everything else. We found it difficult to kind of do all, to manage the house along with managing all the performances. So we decided to do it to tape for the third one. But I think you get to see the tools, and you got to see some of the work.
Absolutely. I just want you to know I was about this close to buying myself a Viking helmet for this event. I've always thought that was a pretty cool fashion choice on your part.
Yeah, I had part of that time period, I had a series of hats that I bought and used in performance, kind of dress up for the, for being, that's, people do wear special costumes for doing performances, and I did, and I still wear hats a lot.
Mm. I know that when I talked to you in your office, you still had the Viking helmet and maybe the pith helmet in your office still?
Yeah, I still have those hats.
Nice.
I don't know, I may have lost track of the Viking helmets. That got moved with some show with an IP, so I think it ended up in a box when it came back from the show somewhere at EVL. But the rest of the hats I still have around.
Nice. Well, I guess we're at a point where I'd like to open the floor to discussions. Just hop on if you have any questions, and I'll try to keep some sense of order going. I see a hand raised by Amy.
Hi, Dan. Hi, everybody. Hi. I want to thank you because I feel like you and the other pioneers are passing on this legacy to us that has both the vision and the technology and the ideology like all wrapped into one. So as younger artists, I feel some sense of responsibility to carry that legacy on. And I would like to ask you about what you see for the future. So right now we're at this really interesting time. The access to create and consume electronic art is greater than it's ever been before. What do you feel is important to focus on now and in the future of electronic art, performance, and activism?
I don't really have a good answer for that. In terms of my artwork, I always try to move forward and grab the most powerful technology available and use that to produce things that nobody's seen before. So that's been my path, so that I moved essentially, from this live production using analog equipment to doing more animation, computer graphics generating things that ended up going to tape. And then I was able to move into virtual reality systems, which is back to the live interactive stuff. And that's kind of where I've stuck myself right now. And I don't know, I don't know really how to advise anybody else's path through this kind of thing, but 2 things come to mind. One is that at least some of us should be grabbing the latest and best technology and making it used to communicate new things with new technology and not copy old things, because that's what I did. And I thought that's what I think other people should do. And so I think that's one of the important elements, is that to take advantage of the new affordances, the new capabilities, especially if you're a young artist, because you can learn stuff. It's harder for me actually to go back and, let's say, learn a completely new technology, but that's what young people in schools in particular and beginning to develop an artistic career, that's their job in a sense. And so that's a recommendation. And I still think the variety of channels is really a wonderful thing. And so you can get niche audiences that are huge numbers rather than niche audiences that are like 10 people, which I think is great.
Yeah. Amy, by the way, is that an image processor behind you?
It is. I see there's a Robert Snyder on the call, and I'm not sure if it's the same Bob Snyder that I bought this from in Chicago about 20 years ago. I see Don Day is on the call. He's worked on this for me. And Dan, you actually came and visited me, I don't know if you remember, in San Francisco and played on this
Yes,
machine.
I do. I do remember.
Probably 10 years ago. So I hope that we are doing you proud. I'm actually really flattered by the response because I do use new technology, more biotechnology, but I hope we're all doing you and the other pioneers proud with our work.
Yeah, I think that point you just made is very important because at the time I was developing, both analog and digital computation technology was the new frontier. And it's what there was more science, like Science Magazine, which is the premier scholarly publication in science. At the time I was doing in school and the time I was doing this stuff, it was full of physics. Well, now Science Magazine is full of biology. And there's still some physics in that and stuff, and there's some other stuff. And so I think what you've just said is actually a very important point, which is that if you attach to where the science and the technology is moving the fastest, you get pulled along the fastest. And that's so that, I guess you helped me. That's the recommendation I would make is to identify what are the most powerful things changing in the culture and grab them, and they'll pull you along.
Well, yeah, the influence of technology on humans is one of the biggest ones right now. So thank you.
I have a question from Patrick Taylor.
Hi, Dan. Thanks so much for the event. It's so cool being able to actually talk to you as an artist that's only started making video art in the last decade. It's really amazing to be able to interface with a sort of living legend like yourself. And I wanted to point a question at the sort of motivations behind video art in the 1970s going into the 80s and sort of refer it to art that's being made today. Something that I've been very interested in is the relationship between consciousness and the emergent behavior that we see in digital and analog video systems. And I wanted to know if the folks that were making video art back in the day, and like when you were constructing the IP, if those emerging behaviors were, standing out to you as being sort of evident of any of these sort of metaphysical truths or anything like that, or if it was a purely technological pursuit.
No, I think, it's kind of a different feeling now, but we were definitely interested in modifying minds. So after all, it was a psychedelic period, and our imagery was psychedelic, and the drugs were psychedelic, and we really thought that, and I think it's actually true, that participating with these tools, what was most important about them was what they changed you, the way they changed your view of the world, and the way that they changed the way you thought about the world, in addition to making you capable of doing imagery and in sounds that nobody had ever seen before, in a context that nobody ever seen before. So I think it's the same goal. And there's nothing really terribly new about it, because I think when anybody learns a new art form, like you learn how to draw or something like that, it changes the way you see the world, and you never go back. I mean, it literally makes you see things that nobody else can see, that hasn't gone through some kind of activity that has to do with using your vision and incorporating it into your life and into your hands, in a sense. So that's, I think there's a lot of similarities, and even some of the old ideas circulate back. The glitch art movement, and the live coding performance movements that are going on. There's some of this stuff that actually calls back very directly to the stuff we were doing in the 70s in terms of technique. The technology has changed in the sense of the instruments and their power, much amplified. So there's that kind of recurrence. But I also think there's real similarity in using these tools to kind of like change people's consciousness.
One thing I discovered in my research was at KQED in San Francisco, you had artists like Joanne Kiger or Stephen Beck doing work that was very much adjacent to the San Francisco psychedelic scene. And I find it interesting, the differences and similarities between your work and theirs.
Yeah, there were a substantial number of these communities, both on the West Coast and the East Coast and in Chicago and in other areas that were very much doing the same thing with, kind of related tools. And so this, I think Chicago was a very important one of these communities and what it produced, but it was not unique. There were several of these communities with very much the same goals with somewhat different tools, but still the best technology, electronic technology of the time.
Absolutely. Michael Chernoff, you have a question?
Thank you. Yes, Dan, I have a technology question because a lot of my contemporaries, you mentioned Macs, a lot of the patching with that analog processors do. Now a lot of people say like, oh, you can just do Macs and you can do everything on the computer. And personally, I still like racks. I still like the actual hardware. So I kind of wanted to get your perspective on like how do the two work together, because you were putting your processor into computers, and like now is it better to go completely digital and let the computer do the work? Because I also feel like there's maybe like a loss of human element. There's like a chaos that also comes with actual electronics, and I just wanted to know what you think the future of that is, or what your feelings on that are now.
Yeah, I don't know about the future. I can talk to you about my feelings on it. Well, first of all, the analog IP is a computer. It was based on general purpose analog computers of the time, which were used to like test the designs of airplanes and rockets and all of that stuff. I mean, it's a device which adds things, subtracts things, multiplies things, differentiates things, integrates things. So it was a computer, and it was a computational device. So, I mean, for the longest time, I kept thinking, well, I can certainly do this stuff in computers, and I wonder if I should reproduce the analog IP in the digital domain. And I think everything about it, with one exception, would be better. Certainly the computation would be faster and better. The resolution would be higher. Color qualities would be higher. I still had a pretty strict attitude about the signals of even the analog. I didn't particularly like the rattiness of the system. I would have loved to have perfect analog computation, which you can actually have now at the bandwidths we're talking about. But what was really different about it was the interface. The fact that it was spread out in space, and you see people using analog synthesizers and making music doing the same thing. I mean, over here, here's the image of the dancer over here, and the knob under it is you're controlling something about that thing, and that's being combined over here with a signal that's coming from, let's say, the videotape recording of the ocean. And it's really spread out in space, and it's extremely tactile, so you can deal with it like a musical instrument. And that's what would be missing, but not in theory, but in most implementations, that's what would be missing in a modern computer version that did all the same arithmetic, but at higher quality levels. And I still think it's possible, but I've never really figured out how to reproduce that interface in a way that I thought would be effective. So I agree with you completely that that the fact that the way you control the analog instrument is so different than the way you control MSP Max. I mean, you can external controls to sliders and knobs, and you did that in the IP too, where you would have a separate control panel, which would control much of the IP and put some controls closer to your hands. But I think what would need to be invented to have really both of those things is a radically different kind of physical interface than we're currently using.
And I have a question from Daniel Summer.
I presumably need to turn off the mute. So actually, I haven't got a question. I just wanted to say hi, Dan. It's been a minute. I think it's been 16 years. If you recall, we met at John Whitney Jr.'s porch after the visual music show in
Right.
Boca.
Yes, I remember that. Indeed, it was a wonderful evening.
It really was very memorable. Great to see you. Sorry it's been this long and that it's electronic, perhaps again in person at your next big Smithsonian show.
That'd be nice.
Good.
And is that an image processor behind you?
I'm afraid it's not. That is a machine that was referenced earlier in the talk. That's Bill and Steve's machine, the Rodetra.
Oh, nice.
And actually, I'll show off some hardware. Here's the first LZX, which is actually a modified Atari. So that's fun. So,
yeah, so of course, there were many people that used at the Art Institute, they had both the Rodetra scan processor and an IP. And there were a number of people that used both of those instruments together. And they're really quite complementary in a way, because the Rodetra could control geometry. It could move things along and warp faces or warp activities. The IP could not. It was it was a point processor as caused, but it had very good control over color and extracting image detail and modifying detail and stuff like that. So they actually were very complementary instruments and worked very well together.
Someday it will be fun to patch a pair if the opportunity arises.
It certainly could be done. I think the Art Institute actually kept their IPs, and they're still used in classes, much to my amazement. And I show up there every once in a while. So in their live or real-time video, I'm not quite sure what the catchphrase they use for it. They teach people, introduce people to different classes of instruments, one of which is the analog IP, and then people do projects with, one of the tools that are introduced or with a new tool. And so it still has a role in education. So there are these IPs at a number of places, and it would be great to get a Rodetra synthesizer and an IP together in the same room, because they used to be together at the School of the Art Institute.
I had not heard of that. An interesting notion that was suggested to me recently is to put some of these old analog machines online and connect them via a real-time video link, which apparently works these days over the internet.
Yeah, you could. I think, the musicians, much to my amazement, seem to have developed a system where they can play together, and it operates kind of like it does in performing together.
That's right.
It would be conceivable to have two people, one performing on the IP, and then sending several channels of information across, or even just one channel of information across would do it. That was typically done. Is you converted the visual output of the scan processor into video, and then it could be sent to the IP, and you could also feed some of that back to the Rodetra for that matter.
And now this guy's plus minus 10. What's the control voltage on the IP?
So yeah, that's a good point. The IP had input modules. First of all, to answer your question directly, the video protocol is plus and minus 0.5 volts, DC coupled, and the control voltage regions are the same. But there was modules that were designed to interface with the standard mode protocols. So there was instruments that took the 0 to 12 volt stuff that was used to control pitch and got it into the IP in addition to audio. And there were modules that converted the plus and minus 0.5 volt DC coupled to the 0 to 12 volt coupled. That was the standard with the mode model 2, say. And so the IP has modules designed to do that conversion. And they were adjustable enough, so you could certainly do it, 0 to 10 volts or minus 10 to plus 10 volts, or They were specifically designed to be able to interface to different instruments. There are modules that do that. So we could do that.
So coming up with the online versions of these machines might be a good project for us to do while we're still around.
Yeah, I think that would be a good project. Again, in my own practice, I'm working in the virtual reality and trying to, learn about artificial intelligence processing methods, which I'm a little behind. And I know when the internet got really wild, I kept saying, well, maybe I should move and start producing work meant for the internet, and I decided to stick with VR. And now I'm still deciding to stick with VR. So that's kind of what I'm focusing on. So it's a great project. I don't think I would have the bandwidth to be much help besides advising people. I'd be happy to, talk to people about it, but I don't think I would be able to do it. And I personally don't have a working IP. I have a IP that my original IP has been cosmetically restored, but not electronically restored.
One last thought, and then I'll shut up. Project to develop AI to control an IP via TCP/IP with feedback measured in likes might be a fun machine learning project and produce interesting results.
That's a great idea. It's really wonderful.
That definitely revitalized the community aspect of the EVEs.
Yeah.
We've got a question from Ian Lee. Sorry about the wait.
It's okay. So I would like to know, so basically when working on your machines, it involved a lot of using the engineering design process, right? Which include the 6 steps of identify, imagine, plan, create, test, and improve. Am I right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the thing was, at that time, I actually knew electronic design. I learned that being a radio amateur, starting in junior high and going kind of through high school. I learned to build circuits and I learned to design things. And so I kind of knew how to do that. But, one of the important things in this very time period of which this work was being created is that I was one of a small group of people that understood both digital technology and analog technology, and specifically analog connection to NTSC TV. So I actually consulted with a number of companies on teaching them how to do a righteous NTSC signal out of a digital computer, which was non-trivial because those two electronic disciplines were quite separate. But there was definitely a lot of my time was spent to kind of creatively working with electronic circuits and teaching myself the latest analog computer technologies, and then learning to incorporate them to do video signals.
Okay, and so to be clear here, analog, so digital signals computers can only read digital signals, right?
Well, if you have a computer, it can read analog signals just like it can listen to audio, but there's a separate device that you use to take the analog information and make it digital, and the same thing going out, special D to A converters. That convert to analog. So they are different computational domains, and you have to convert between them.
Okay, so do you remember the type of the specific name of the analog digital converter that you had to use on the Sandeen processor?
Do I remember the name of that one? Let's see.
I remember.
The output of the image processor and the input of the image processor are both analog. So when actually using that instrument, there wasn't a need for digital communication. But I don't actually remember, but there was a circuit block. You could buy it. It wasn't an IC. It was a larger integrated circuit that at that time could do analog to digital conversion of between digital TV, digital signals coming out of a computer and analog signals. But actually, it's the same general class of the stuff was available in terms of the basic designs of the circuits are exactly the same now as they were then. It's just that they're now compact and much higher performance.
Okay, and so this might be my last question. So, like, how difficult was it for you to self-teach all the stuff and also communicate with the inventors of TCP and IP to help you create your work and share it with the world? Like, how difficult was it for you?
It's hard to say. I mean, it wasn't difficult for me at all, in a sense, because I just enjoyed it immensely. And I deeply enjoyed learning electronic design details because they were kind of so amazing. There were a whole class of new components that were available about the time I started to do it that allowed me to operate pretty abstractly. I didn't know how, I only needed to design electronic circuits at a fairly high level because the hard parts were in little blocks of plastic that I could connect together. So it didn't feel hard to me at all. Not that it wasn't hard work and that I wasn't immersed in it like for, a couple of years to both kind of learn enough electronics to be able to design that instrument. But it didn't feel difficult to me. It just was hard work.
Okay, I think that's all I have. Thank you for your advice.
Thank you for having some great questions.
Thank you all. I think it's about time to wrap this up. Yes, Sarah, how do you want to go from here?
But yes, thank you so much to Dan Sandin and to Jason Nebergall and for everyone for attending. This is our last event for the spring, but we will start back up in July. So please follow us on email or social media to join another one of these events. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great night.
Thank you so much, Sarah. You've done a huge amount of work for this. I appreciate it. This would not have gone off as smoothly as it did without you. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank Sarah, the showrunner, for doing all of this stuff. But I also would like to thank Tom Weinberg, who's chair of Media Burn, because he's been a supporter of video production, video artists, and documentarians from the 70s on. And he was very helpful and just a constantly solid, supportive collaborator, all the way from the time when I began doing video through now. So thank you, Tom Weinberg.
Absolutely.
Yes. All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.